Um, okay, so yeah, last week we had just a short session because this whole Dalai Lama was teaching. Um, so we'll continue from where we left off last week. I explained a bunch of things, but we didn't get a chance to meditate or have any discussion about those. So we'll do that first, do some meditation, and then review a little bit what we went over last week, then do a little meditation, then then have some discussion, and then continue with the kind of the rest of the sort of material to be presented. And see how far we get. We'll probably have to add another session next week um, to review and finish up going over any material we haven't gone over yet for this module. But let's start by generating positive motivation and then for the session. So get comfortable where you're sitting and turn your mind inwards. Spend a minute just kind of focusing your attention. So you're ready, some concentration. It's a mental focus. Check in with yourself to see how your mind is, how things are going, what's your state of mind. And gradually generate a positive motivation for this session on Refuge and 3 jewels, Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So if you like, visualize yourself surrounded by all sentient beings, friends, antagonists, strangers. Generate the mind of bodhicitta, thinking, in order to free myself and all sentient beings from the oceans of samsaric suffering, I must quickly become enlightened. Therefore, I'll engage in this session in hearing, contemplation, and meditation on Refuge and the 3 jewels. If you like, you can visualize the field of refuge before you, Shakyamuni Buddha, Dharma text surrounded by other other objects of refuge, other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. So the Buddha, or you can also visualize your own teacher represents the Buddha, jewel of the Buddha refuge, and the Dharma text on a table in front of him represents the Sangha refuge, the Dharma refuge. And then being surrounded by other Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, or just the Buddha himself also, alone, can represent the Sangha refuge. So then the simplest kind of refuge formula is simply, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha, I go for refuge to the Buddha, I go for refuge to the Dharma, I go for refuge to the Sangha. So if you like, try to generate the mind of refuge. Trusting oneself in the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Recognizing the suffering we wish to be free from now and in the future, and the ability of the objects of refuge, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, to protect us and guide us to freedom from such suffering. And then Yeah, totally immersing our mind in those two recognitions, then entrusting our self to the three jewels of refuge. Okay. So, yeah, that's a very short form of refuge. So let's just review briefly, just glance over the outlines of what we did, what we went over last week. Mainly what we went over last week, just, well, why don't we try to, before we use our cheat sheet, we'll just try to remember first, see what's still in our minds. So, yeah, maybe, what do you all remember from last week? So I'll check what's in your minds first. Before I check what's in my mind. Can you remember? Try to think last.
Thing that I was watching on the video, but one thing, and maybe I got distracted, but it seemed to be you was stressing you can only take refuge in the Buddha and don't take any refuge in anything else. And I wanted to go back and re-listen to that, or did I hear it wrong?
Yeah, we could discuss that more after we meditate.
Okay.
Well, yeah, that's one of the more difficult kind of ideas we discussed last week, but that's a good one to discuss more. But yeah, that's something I mentioned last week. Definitely. That's one thing. What else did we talk about? I think I forget what that was part of. I think that's because we talked about different ways of going for refuge, right? And that was the fourth. I think there were four. That was one of them.
Yeah.
So we talk about ultimate and conventional refuge, the objects of ultimate and conventional refuge.
Yeah, I mentioned that. That wasn't actually that was part of the outlines of the week prior, the second session. Last week was the third session. I did mention it, because it's important. Well, because we talked about the qualities of the main thing we talked about was in ways of going for refuge was the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. So then in terms of that, it's helpful to think about, again, the ultimate Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and conventional Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. What else do you guys remember from last week?
I think we talked about the reasons why you might go for refuge, that they protect you and you have some confidence that they can help.
Yeah, that comes up again and again because that's kind of it's like the essence of refuge.
Right.
But definitely when we reviewed things at the beginning, that's one thing we discussed. Jan, do you remember anything from last week?
Was it last week that you talked about the fear, which would make you want to go for refuge, even though it didn't have to be as graphic as what Pabongkun Rinpoche wrote, that it should be a healthy fear like we need to have to survive our lives.
Yeah. Also, we discussed that a little bit last week. Because again, that's one of the main causes for going for refuge is the sort of sense of a danger of harm. If we follow our afflictive emotions, if we create negative karma. If we live our lives in kind of a confused, there's a misguided way. Dana?
So I don't remember if we talked about it last week, but I know I had a question about the Sangha, right? If the unconventional and what was the other one? Conventional and the ultimate Sangha or something like that. And my question, there seemed to be some confusion about whether I can actually consider this class my Sangha, or Venerable Katie's Lam Rim meditation, the Sangha. And I think that in some instances, it's not considered a Sangha, but I think you said that it could be. So
Yeah, definitely can. You can, yeah. But that's another good thing to discuss. We can discuss more later. Okay, so now I'll just go over kind of formally what we
Bodies
went over last time.
about.
Is it my audio not good? That's okay. Okay. Okay, session 3. That was last week. Yeah. Ways of going for refuge. So the measure of having taken refuge, it's called that, but actually it's more like ways of going for refuge, and then the benefits of taking refuge. So then in the measure of taking refuge, there are 4 different kind of ways to take refuge. Taking refuge by knowing the good qualities of one's refuge, or the objects of refuge, means the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha here. So that's most of what we looked at. And then taking refuge by knowing the differences between the 3 jewels, and taking refuge due to one's beliefs or due to having kind of conviction, and taking refuge by not asserting another refuge. So James, you were just mentioning. So first, knowing the good qualities. So there's the good qualities of the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. And then the good qualities of the Buddha, there's the qualities of his body, the qualities of Buddha's speech, the qualities of the Buddha's mind, which is most important, because the qualities of the body and speech arise from the qualities of the Buddha's mind. And actually, the Buddha's body and speech actually are his mind, actually, just appearing as a physical form. It's not like the Buddha's body isn't like material. It's not made of atoms, like other gross matter. But it's actually, what do you say? Well, it's a Dharma. Well, I don't know what do you say. It's Tibetan. But anyway, it's basically the Buddha's mind just appearing as a physical aspect. Kind of like in our dreams, our own mind casts the appearance of physical, things, like in trees and land and cliffs and water and stuff. So, but that it only appears to our mind. But the Buddha's mind can appear as physical things to the minds of other sentient beings, and then his speech as well. So anyway, the Buddha's qualities of the Buddha's mind are mainly compassion, infinite compassion, totally unconditional, universal compassion, and then Buddha's wisdom, which is his power to know all things, the ultimate truth, emptiness, the ultimate nature of all phenomena, dependent arising in emptiness, and then also all conventional phenomena. So that's what I want to meditate mainly on today, is the qualities of Buddha. We try to for ourselves imagine, conceive of the qualities of the Buddha, especially the Buddha's mind, infinite. What is infinite compassion? What is perfect wisdom? What is the potential of a mind to increase and develop, love, compassion, wisdom, kindness, generosity, patience. Because when we think about the qualities of the Buddha, indirectly, we're also thinking about our own potential. What's possible for ourselves, for any sentient being. And then the third of the Buddha's qualities are his deeds, his works. And then we looked at the qualities of the Dharma, briefly, the teachings of the Buddha, and the qualities of the Sangha. And then taking refuge by knowing the differences between the 3 jewels, which is kind of laid out by Bongka's Lam Rim. And then due to one's beliefs that the Buddha teaches the refuge, so the Dharma is, or that the Buddha teaches refuge and basically teaches the truth, right? That the Dharma is the actual refuge because it explains, is explanation of realization of truth. And the Sangha assists practitioners who take refuge. And then taking refuge by not asserting another refuge, which means, basically, if you go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha as like your supreme or your most trusted kind of guide, then you don't, if you're going to, I mean, you can, I guess you can be exclusive about that, or you cannot. It's sort of personal choice. But in the Buddhist, kind of idea of what is refuge is to go for refuge to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. And doesn't mean we can't relate to or have respect for other spiritual traditions, other spiritual teachers, and so forth. But if they teach something that is in clear disagreement with or clear conflict with then the Buddhist teachings, then you wouldn't go for ultimate refuge to others. So, but there's a lot of things to discuss in there, so we can come back and talk about that more. And then the benefits of taking refuge, 8 benefits we went through. Which, while I'm reviewing now, I should mention, because one of them I was, number 5 here. You will not be harmed by human or non-human beings. So I was pointing out the contradiction that, well, the apparent contradiction, right? That there's many people who go for refuge, but they're still harmed by things. Like when I was quite new Buddhist, the first, quite new, I think I was a monk then. Anyway, I met this very kind, gentleman from Boston. He was a very active member of the, I think it's Kurukula Center in Boston. And I met him in Kopan. We spent a month or so there together. And he was quite older practitioner than me, and very good practitioner, very kind-hearted, generous guy, offered a lot of time and service, and very serious about his meditation and practice. And then like a couple of years later, he was just suddenly hit by in a hit and run accident in Boston. So there's many instances of things like that. So what does it mean? Clearly, I don't know if he actually has refuge in his mind, but I think you well can. Just because you have refuge in your mind, it doesn't mean you won't be harmed by, other sentient beings, human or non-human beings. So what does it mean here? Then I think the way I'm comfortable with interpreting is not like you'll have some kind of magical protection. I think that's the wrong idea we tend to get. Like if we have refuge, then there's this kind of magical force field around us that protects us from getting harmed by anything. But that's not reality, right? That's not the case. So I think what it means here is that if we sincerely go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and then try to practice in accordance with the Buddhist teachings, the main practice is habituating our minds to positivity, to positive attitudes, and trying to associate with people who have a positive effect on our mind, and in relation to anyone we meet, trying to not harm them and benefit them as much as we can. That's the fundamental practice of Buddhism, is not harming others and benefiting others as much as we can. So like Lama Yeshe, for today's session, there's in the required reading, there's the last article in the required reading kind of collection of PDF of articles with the PDF packet for today. So the last article is by Lama Yeshe. It's a brilliant explanation of refuge, just really, really, really clear, concise, profound, as only kind of Lama Yeshe presents Dharma. But he makes the strong point that, if someone, in his mind, and I think it's very true, is for someone to be Buddhist, they don't actually have to know about the Buddha or even have heard the name Buddha. If they lead their life in a way that they really try to develop their own mind in a positive way, they avoid harming others, they try to benefit others as much as they can, then such a person is a Buddhist. They're practicing exactly the Buddhist teachings, even though they have never heard of the Buddhist teachings. So we have to it's really important to look at the essence of who was the Buddha? What was he teaching? What does it mean to practice, as in accordance with the path that he showed, and not get caught up in kind of names and labels and formalities, but look at the essence of, leading our life in such a way that we abandon harming anyone whatsoever and try to benefit ourselves and others as much as we can. So if we do that, then naturally we stop creating negative karma. So every harm we receive from inanimate, from like natural disasters, inanimate environment, illness, or from other sentient beings harming us, other people doing things to hurt us, is as a result of our own karma. Right? That's another essential thing the Buddha taught. It's a result of our karma. So if we take refuge and then practice sincerely, then we stop creating the causes for harm, for receiving harm, for being harmed. And that's how we're protected. So that's the main way we're protected. That's how refuge protects us, is by showing us how to transform our own behavior so that we don't create the causes for harm. But for negative karma, so one reason we are harmed is because we've created the negative karma to be harmed. But then for that karma to ripen, it requires conditions, right? Causes and conditions. Just like for a seed, we create a seed, or there's a seed for something to grow, but for that seed to ripen, it needs moisture, soil, warmth of the sun, and so forth. It needs conditions. So even we've created negative karma, for that karma to ripen, it requires, conditions. So those conditions are generally our own negative attitudes, not always, but often. So if we, lead our life in a way that we really try to be, be positive, try to generate kindness, patience, wisdom, renunciation, bodhicitta, and so forth, then it's like we abandon, following anger, following greed, following selfishness. Then it's like we're reducing the amount of conditions in our mind that can cause negative karma to ripen. So in that way, also we are protected. That's why, like the mantra, when you think about the Vajrayana or Mahayana Vajrayana path, mantra, in Sanskrit, the word means something like mind protection. Why do we say mantras like Om Mani Padme Hum? In order to remind ourselves of the meaning, some essential meaning of the Buddha, of the Dharma, the Buddha taught. And in the case of Om Mani Padme Hum, it's to remind ourselves of that I aspire to be the union of compassion and wisdom, right? So by saying mantras, we remind ourselves of essential meaning, and and being reminded of remembering is like living in remembrance of some essential aspects of the Buddha's teachings. That protects our mind. So if our mind is in a positive frame, a positive frame of mind, then that protects us from giving rise to afflictive emotions, and that protects us from activating seeds of negative karma that we've created in the past. Now, does that mean like no negative karma will ripen? No, it doesn't. Still, some negative karmas will ripen anyway. So yeah, anyway, there's more to discuss about that, but yeah, what does that mean about how negative karmas ripen? But I think anyway, a long explanation of what it means here. I think it's something like that. You'll not be harmed because you'll keep your mind in a positive state, and you'll associate with others who have a positive effect, and thereby things will just go better in your life than they would otherwise in this life. And then in the long term, eventually you can totally, be free from all of the suffering of samsara and achieve enlightenment. In which case, of course, you don't experience being harmed any longer whatsoever. So it's like the harm becomes less, the harm you receive from others becomes less and less and less, and eventually you totally transcend that. Yeah, okay. So that's what I wanted to review from last week. So let's meditate for a bit now. Say 10 minutes or so on I'd suggest, of course, you're free to think about whatever, you like. We'll do analytical meditation. But a suggestion I'll make is to think about the qualities of the Buddha and the Dharma and the Sangha, but start with the Buddha and then see how far you get. So remember the qualities of, I think most important are the qualities of the Buddha's mind, Buddha's holy mind, and having infinite compassion, loving kindness, and all the other kind of conventional positive qualities, generosity, patience, and so forth. And then especially the mind of wisdom, understanding the ultimate nature of things, that all phenomena are empty of existing from their own side. So remember the Shakyamuni Buddha, he was, in the past, he was, as Lama Yeshe said, he was even more confused than we are now, right? He was an ordinary sentient being just like us, but he practiced the path and eventually became enlightened. So, so when we think about the qualities of the Buddha, it's not like we're thinking about, the qualities of an almighty kind of God or something. This person who has been perfect from beginningless time, has never been imperfect. Rather, we're thinking about the qualities of a person, Shakyamuni Buddha or a Buddha in general, but someone who was an ordinary, confused, suffering person like us in the past, and then they independence upon their own practice, dependence upon gathering the causes of, accumulation of merit, accumulation of wisdom, purifying, meditating, and so forth. Gradually, they achieved the state of full enlightenment, the elimination of all faults and the perfection of all positive qualities. So as we think about, try to imagine the qualities of a Buddha, their body, speech, and especially their mind, then also relate that to one's own potential, right? And the inner refuge, one's own potential that exists now, and also, the result that one can achieve in the future, and thereby be of the greatest possible benefit to other sentient beings. Okay, so I won't say anything more for 10 minutes. Try to meditate on the qualities of the Buddha, and then if you like, the Dharma and the Sangha, and relate that also to one's own potential. Okay, so gradually bring your meditation to a conclusion by reviewing what you've been thinking about, what you've been contemplating, and then gradually, yeah, draw some kind of conclusion that you'd like to carry into the future. Okay, so let's stop there. So one thing I think we'll do a discussion group now. I think we can do. Let's make 2 breakout rooms of like 3 each. I think Mary Ellen and I usually sit out for a bit. So we'll make 2 breakout rooms of, well, or is it 4 and 3? No, it's 3 each. Yeah, for 15 minutes, and then we'll come back and all kind of discuss some things together. So in that 15 minutes, yeah, discuss whatever, whatever you feel like, whatever's on your mind, either, things that are rubbing you the wrong way about certain aspects of the refuge, or things that are just find confusing or not clear, or, things you find really inspiring, whatever you want to discuss. But when we come back, I do want to ask you all about how you're feeling about meditating like this, just being on your own without any guidance for 10, 15 minutes. I want to make sure it's kind of, you're comfortable with that. So I'll ask you about that when we come back. But for now, let's have 15 minutes discussion. Okay, welcome back. The first group, here's the other group. Okay. Okay, so before your questions, I want to ask you all. How are you feeling about this kind of meditating for 10 or 15 minutes just without any guidance? You feel like you're comfortable? You feel like you kind of know what you're doing?
Mhm.
Yeah, I had a couple monkey minds that took me a while to catch, but yeah.
Of course, yeah, that's normal. Yeah.
Personally, I like it.
Yeah, I prefer it too.
I liked it.
Actually.
You
Yeah.
do?
Yeah.
You prefer it? Oh, good. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's better, no, because if I'm leading, whoever's leading a meditation, then basically they're just, occasionally saying what they happen or what they think is good to think about. But everyone's different, right? So we all have different kind of paths of investigation we should be following. So. Someone else wanted to say something? Mary Ellen, or?
No, I agree. I think it's nice. It's more like, it's more meditation than just listening with my eyes closed.
Okay, good. Oh, I especially wanted to just make sure if any of you have any feel uncomfortable, about not sure I'm doing it right, or is it okay to think about this or that, to clear up any kind of doubts or like that. Okay. If you don't have though, that's fine. Okay, so now, what do you want to discuss? I mean, James had a question at the beginning, or whether other things came up. Did you discuss? And who else had a question? Oh, Dana about Sangha, and James about other refuges. But did you discuss some of those in your group, and did you come to any further?
We
Go ahead.
yeah, we actually had a discussion about the 5th vow, and how serious that was, and why is not drinking alcohol a vow. We had a long conversation
Intoxicants.
about that. Well,
Okay.
it says, yeah.
Well, it's intoxicants actually. It's not just alcohol. So, but the word in Tibetan is like nyunze. Nyun means crazy, right? And ze is a substance. So it's any substance that makes you quote unquote crazy. But here, what that means is to lose your ability to reason and think rationally. So usually when His Holiness gives the vow of not taking intoxicants, I mean, for Tibetans, they don't really have, in their culture, they don't really have other drugs, right? So it's not really even what they're thinking about. It's just alcohol. So what His Holiness usually says is, if you really feel like, if you'd like to take the vow, but you really feel like you can't totally give up drinking at all, then as his teacher, Ling Rinpoche, said to one old Tibetan man who wanted to take the refuge vows, but felt like he couldn't totally abandon giving up beer because he liked to drink beer. But he said, okay, you can drink a little bit, but just don't drink so much that you get drunk, right? Which is kind of the essence of the vows, that you don't take intoxicants so much that, or take a, well, I mean, intoxicants can be a very broad term, right? So, and different substances affect your mind differently. So there are substances we take, like coffee, like we can drink a lot of coffee or smoke cigarettes even, and it gives some kind of a buzz, but it doesn't impair your ability to think clearly and reason very much. I mean, not anything like compared to being drunk on alcohol, right? So, yeah. So, yeah, His Holiness, when he gives the vow, though, he usually says you can drink a little, but don't drink so much that you drunk. And then, yeah, you have to think with regard to other substances like, psychedelics or marijuana or others. I mean, if you want to keep the vow really strictly, it would be just avoid those, right? But then but most of the vows, there's not like a black and white line, like this is not breaking it, this is breaking it. Of course, not breaking it is quite clear. Just if you don't drink at all, don't take any any drugs at all, then of course you're not breaking it. But then, if His Holiness says, well, you can drink a little bit, just don't become drunk, then that means, well, taking a little bit is not taking. But then the question becomes, well, what about another drug that, well, like that's like coffee, more kind of like, so what's a stronger version of coffee is like, speed or something. Is that an intoxicant then? Does that impair your ability to think clearly? Maybe in small doses like alcohol. No, but in large doses, yes. I mean, I'm not saying one or the other, right? But just saying you kind of we have to understand what's the essence and check. And I'm also saying not it's okay to smoke marijuana or take psychedelics. I'm saying one has to check how it affects one's mind. But if it affects your mind such that you think you don't have the ability to reason, especially being able to identify what are harmful behaviors and what are harmful behaviors, what are positive behaviors, right? If it causes us to mix up the two and then engage in harmful behaviors, then of course, we should abandon it. Right? That's the main kind of essence.
That was really
So
helpful.
you guys spoke about that.
Yeah,
Please.
that was
Yeah.
super helpful because until you gave that nuance, it seemed like a very Catholic kind of black and white rule. So yeah, that fits better.
Yeah. And the reason I'm saying that's what His Holiness says is just to be sure, like I'm not just making that up. Like that's
Right.
from, a lineage, one of the main teachers of the whole tradition. Although the part about, I'm taking that reasoning His Holiness is giving, and in the text about what is an intoxicant, and then we have to map that onto, well, what is that? How does that relate to other kinds of substances, and whether they're allowable or not, right? Yeah. But okay, well, any other pressing kind of questions or issues? What else that were discussed?
Can refuge be an evolution? Like, is it like a switch, and like what kind of like what's different when you do it? Like, can't you just? It's a process, isn't it, of giving, of following.
Definitely, yeah, it definitely is a process. I mean, even before, because I think you're kind of contrasting sort of the evolutionary process of developing our sense of like going for refuge in something versus like the ritual of like going for refuge when you get I don't know if you looked in that the refuge booklet. No, I haven't opened it up now, but like when you formally take refuge, like with Lama Zopa Rinpoche or another Lama in FPMT, you get this little booklet that says like, has your name, the name of the Lama, the date you went for refuge, right? So there's this ritualized kind of refuge. So yeah, it's not that once, even after you formally take refuge, of course you keep generating that attitude more and more and more. I mean, probably up until, you become enlightened or not far before. But yeah, I guess the big difference, what then why have like a formal refuge is because, yeah, it's just like any, I mean, I don't know, it's a lot like a relationship with another person, that we marry. You develop some kind of relationship with the person before you get married, hopefully that you feel like, okay, I can really trust this person. We have such an understanding that I feel like I really want to commit my life to them, and that's mutual. But then you formalize that. Why formalize it ever? Yeah, some people, they don't, and they think, yeah, that's not important. But most people do. Why? So that it becomes like an outward recognition, well, a formal recognition for yourself, but also for others, that this is kind of who I am, who I want to be in the future, and I want to make that also public, something known, so that other people can celebrate in it on the one hand, and other people can support me when I have struggles with that on the other hand, and that I'm, and in relation to maybe the person I'm marrying, and vice versa, that we're mutually make a very explicit, commitment to each other. That's not just an understanding that we have and that has been confirmed by different conversations, but is like made explicitly a commitment we take, and take vows, in a formal ceremony. It makes the whole thing much more like concrete and clear and definite. So I think the formal refuge ceremony is like that. It's like, okay, this is something I want to make very clear, very explicit for myself, for others. But then, of course, after that, you continue, your sense of what it means to go for refuge continues to evolve. Like for me, when I took refuge in 1999, but then I didn't really study refuge, very deeply until 2004, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, about 2009, and when we debated refuge here in the monastery. And then I have a lot of doubt about, like, do I actually have refuge or not? Even, am I actually Buddhist or not? So it's something that evolves. But to your question before the discussion, James, before at the beginning about that, what is it? Taking refuge by not taking refuge in other things. Because I wanted to discuss that more, actually. Yeah, taking refuge by not asserting another refuge. Because that's one of the, I think, well, I want to discuss also all the things that might rub you the wrong way in this whole module. I mean, any module, but especially refuge. Because I think there's several things, and that's kind of one of them that I think for many of us at the beginning of our introduction to Buddhism, it might kind of, rub us the wrong way. Because I mean, generally every world religion tends to have this sort of an unpalatable aspect of asserting that it is the best and all the others are secondary and not as good, right? It's like, I'm reading actually a good book now called I think it's called like something like the superiority complex in Buddhism. Like all religions tend to have a superiority complex where they think they're better and others are not as good. So then when you, something like that, like taking refuge by not taking refuge in any others, it's kind of indirectly saying, and I mean, part of the refuge advice we'll go through later is when you take refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, you don't take refuge in anything else. Sort of indirectly saying because they're the best and nothing else is as good. So, which is so related to an ego, whole ego trip. But every religion is supposed to be trying to reduce our ego and our self-centeredness. But then as a group, we can, even as an individual, it might reduce our ego. But then as a group, if we have this egotistical sense of ourself as a group and being superior to others, isn't that just a different form of egotism? So yes, it is.
But what makes you think that somebody or a group of people who have refuge would think they're superior or have a superiority complex to others? That's kind of a
Because
broad assumption, isn't it?
it is, but in my experience with, I mean, even like the monks in the monastery, I mean, even the monks of Sarah J, they think they're better than the monks of Sarah May generally.
Oh, well, that's always the way.
Yeah, I mean, the monks of Sarah then think they're kind of superior to the Gelugpa monks think or the Gelugpas think they're better than the Nyingmas or Kagyu. It's
Well, of
just because
course.
that's part of our human tendency to have kind of arrogant pride, no? So then everything we do becomes mixed with that. And not that, most individual monks, if I were to ask, do you think, the Gelugpas are better than the Nyingmas? They'll say, no, not like that. No. So most, wise, intelligent ones will not. It's, it's just like if people ask us individually, do you think you're better than others? We'll say, no, I'm not any better than anyone else. But then in some circumstances, we probably act like we feel like we're better than others. I mean, it's like afflictive emotions. We don't want them to arise, but they do sometimes, right? So yeah, but then back to this. So what does it mean though to take refuge by not taking refuge in others? It means basically like one has to clarify it's important to clarify oneself what one feels like is the best path for oneself, right? That doesn't mean it's the best path at all, because it's not the case that everyone would be benefited. Everyone should be Buddhist. Just like it's not the case, it would be best for everyone if they were Christian. Or it would be better for everyone if everyone was, for each individual person, it would be better if they were, Hindu or they were a Muslim or something. Like that's ridiculous. It would be something. It would be better if everyone just ate whole wheat bread and no one ate rice. It's like it's ridiculous because everyone's different. Everyone has different needs, different disposition, and different karma, just like we have different bodies, right? So people just like for different kinds of bodies, different sort of digestive system or whatever, people need different sort of nourishment, different foods. Also due to their certain habituation from when they're young and so forth. So just like that, due to each of us have a different, past lives, a different spiritual disposition, and so we need different spiritual paths. So that's why different spiritual paths exist in the world, right? And that's excellent. But then, so I guess taking refuge in Buddha, Dharma, Sangha is deciding, well, for me, what's best, for me. So, and then not kind of, and then decide, recognizing that clearly, and then not sort of, I guess, not diluting that or not mixing that with other things. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I should stop talking so much, and I'd like to hear more like what kind of concerns or doubts, questions you all have. Related to that or anything else.
I mean, I have a question about this superiority complex that you mentioned. Isn't it the case that in Buddhism, I mean, the ultimate goal is to become a Buddha yourself? And I mean, that's kind of a vision that only Buddhism has. I mean, in other theistic traditions, you never become a god. I mean, the best you can hope is like going to heaven, to have a good rebirth in your next life. So in some sense, then Buddhism has really the highest possible goal in its aspiration. In that sense, I guess you can feel that all the other people, they pursue their religion right now, but at some point they have to become like a Buddhist and, follow that path to become enlightened, really enlightened.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I mean, and also it's not the case that, well, I mean, yeah, to develop their full potential to become a Buddha, yeah, eventually, like just the teachings that one can find in like a Christian path or Hindu path won't be enough. Like it won't take you there. Even within Buddhism, I mean, the in the Sanskrit tradition or the Bodhisattva tradition, even within that, there's the Sutra school and the Tantra school, right? So according to Tantra, even without relying on the teachings of Tantra, you cannot become a Buddha. Just following the Sutra teachings of Buddha is not enough to become fully enlightened. Because the certain causes and conditions to achieve essentially the 4 bodies of a Buddha are extremely specific. No, but yeah. So in a way, I mean, yeah, I guess we would say, I mean, a Buddhist would say, or I would, in a way, you can say that the Buddhist path is uncommon compared to the others. It does have, certain explanation that other paths don't have. So that might well be one of the reasons why one takes refuge in it. Yeah, and that is the case. And in that way, it can be regarded as better. But that doesn't mean it's better for every individual person, at the place they're at that time, or that other paths can't take you towards the same goal. Yeah. I mean, it's like Lama Zopa Rinpoche says. I mean, they can all be good, but they like every view can't be right. No. It doesn't mean that any view is presented is a right view. Like we still have to be able to identify and distinguish between right views and wrong views. So like a view that, if you do evil things, you'll take, you'll take rebirth in hell. They probably don't say rebirth, but go to hell and then you'll be there forever after. Yeah, that's a wrong view. Just because a good religious tradition presents a certain view doesn't mean every view they present has to be right.
I think up until this point, in the Discovering Buddhism series, we haven't touched on that the sutra path is not sufficient to attain Buddhahood. And I think that might be something new for some people in the room.
Yeah, that'll come in I think we do a module on, I don't know, is there a module on Tantra? I forget at the end. Yeah, so that'll come up more then. But basically it has to do with what does it mean to be a Buddha is to achieve the 4 bodies of a Buddha, which is essentially is the Buddha's mind and the Buddha's form body, right? Those are yeah, like I was saying earlier, like the Buddha's form body is just an emanation of the Buddha's mind. It's not a physical something made from, arisen from the 4 elements, like the things around us. Yeah, to achieve that basically depends upon, the Buddha's mind. To achieve the Buddha's mind, it depends upon accumulating the collection of wisdom, right? Basically generating deeper and deeper wisdom primarily. And then other qualities like compassion as well, but primarily wisdom. And then to achieve the Buddha's body depends primarily on accumulating the collection of merit, which mainly comes about by practices like generosity, and then meditating on loving kindness, compassion, the wish to benefit others, not harm, pure morality, so forth. But in the sutra path, when a mind meditating on wisdom, like you can see, when you try to meditate on emptiness, at the same time, can you also meditate on compassion, loving kindness? Not in the one mind in the exact same moment, no, right? But in the in the sutra path, we generate wisdom and then merit separately, basically. The wisdom and method is the more accurate way to say it. So the mind that generating wisdom doesn't practice the method side of the path. The mind practicing the method side of the path, thereby generating merit primarily, doesn't generate wisdom. But in the tantra, the Buddha's 2 bodies, the truth body, which has arisen from wisdom, and the form body, which has arisen from merit, they're completely united. right? So to create a united body of the truth body and the form body are united wisdom and method that are completely, inextricably united. There's just different aspects of the same entity. Then we have to practice a path that is a union of method and wisdom. So only Tantra contains that, the instructions for how to practice in that way, generating a mind, which is a union of wisdom and method, in short. Right? But about Sangha, Dana raised the issue. Can we consider Sangha? In Lama Yeshe's article, that one I mentioned, the last article in the packet, he says clearly, like, yeah, anyone, even they're not Buddhist, anyone who supports you in, the essence of Buddhist practice and being a better person, being a kinder person, reducing anger, reducing, arrogance, reducing selfishness, that person is a Sangha for you, because the essence of Sangha is those people who support us in practicing our spiritual path, basically. So more typically, and then you mentioned like the ultimate Sangha and the conventional Sangha. Yeah, the ultimate Sangha are beings who've actually generated direct perception of the Four Noble Truths. Remember the truth of suffering, truth of the origin of suffering, truth of cessation, truth of the path, and especially within that selflessness, emptiness. That's part of the realization of the truth of suffering, selflessness. But beings who've generated direct realization of those, non-conceptual realization of those, are called Arya beings. They're on the path of seeing. But they're the actual Sangha, because they've directly, in their own experience, they've directly realized the Buddha's teachings, and they've had the experience of actually, completely abandoning some of the afflictive emotions from the root, such that they'll never arise again. Like we can think about what that might be like, but we don't have the experience of that, and so we can't in a powerful way explain and guide others to achieving that. So, but beings who've actually, generated the truth of the path and the truth of cessation in their own mind stream, then there's the actual Sangha. They can, they have a deep experience of the Buddha's teachings, such that they can powerfully support others in practicing. Whereas the conventional Sangha are like typically considered ordained monks and nuns, right? Because they've taken all these vows, that's the main thing of their life, is they devote their life to studying and practicing the Buddha's teachings. And then they wear these robes, right? So they're an outwardly symbol of, the practitioner, the followers of the practitioners of the Buddhist teachings, that community. But then, the ordained people, they depend upon the lay community, right, for support. So lay community are also part of the Sangha. And then in a more essential way, the meaning of Sangha, again, is, those people who are supportive to us in developing ourselves to be a better person. And so that's the very broad meaning. In that way, even people who are not Buddhist or Christian or whatever, secular friends can also be part of our Sangha. Okay, why don't we take a short break now? Oh, no. I was thinking it's been an hour, but it's already been an hour and a half, right? So why don't we take a short break 30 minutes ago and then come back? No, let's take I don't know, 3-minute break and then resume. Okay. So okay. So here we are, session 4. I think I won't finish all this time, but we can, between this week and next week, we can go through the outlines here. And I'll send the outlines out just after this session. So yeah, so this session, this kind of session, practicing with refuge. So practicing within refuge, right? So once we've taken refuge, then how do we practice? What are the different kind of practices we engage in? So, so if we're considering taking refuge, then it's kind of good to know, like, well, what's going to be expected of us afterwards? If we formally take refuge, then what are we kind of supposed to do you know, after that. Yeah. So there's three main points. Advice after one has taken refuge. There's general advice that we should try to follow. Then what are the 5 lay vows and what the 5 lay vows are and the benefits of taking them. So we can either just take refuge without taking the 5 lay vows, and then take, if we want, we can always take the 5 lay vows later, or we can take refuge together with taking the 5 lay vows. Yeah. So that's about that. And then introduction to the refuge preliminary practice. So there's different sets of preliminary practices that are generally done preliminary to doing like a great retreat, but they're commonly done, the preliminary practices, they're usually like 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 Vajrasattva mantras, 100,000 water bowl offerings, or sets of 100,000. So one of them is 100,000 refuge, going for refuge, which means meditating on and reciting the refuge, that one verse like refuge prayer 100,000 times. So a little bit about that. The main thing here, though, advice after one has taken refuge. So there's advice specific to each of the 3 jewels of refuge, and then there's general advice. Right. So first, as far as refuge, in relation to just the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, and then general advice overall. So first, refuge or advice specific to each of the 3 jewels. Before I go on to, I wanted to mention, because we use this term 3 jewels here, which is a translation of the Tibetan term Puncho Sum. But I always kind of hesitate to use the term 3 jewels because Lama Zopa Rinpoche really doesn't like it. He always says as a translation of Kunchok Sum, because Rinpoche always says jewels, it sounds cheap. You kind of think like fake diamonds and stuff that you buy in like, a dollar store or something. So whereas, Kunchok, in Tibetan, kun means rare, something, and chok means supreme or sublime. So kunchok literally means like that which is rare and sublime. So rare, it means because it's not easily found in this world. In all of our rebirths, it's not easy to meet with a Buddha and the Buddha's teachings and a Sangha. They don't exist everywhere in the world at all times in a way that's accessible to sentient beings. And then for most sentient beings, they don't generate, and they don't meet, and even if they don't meet, they don't generate a connection to. So it's very difficult and very rare for them to manifestly exist. And then it's even more rare to connect with them. So that way they're rare. And then chok, they're supreme because they very effectively show the path. And the Buddha shows the path. The Dharma is explanation of and realization of the path in the Sangha. It's a community that supports. So they're like they're supreme in that. They're supreme in showing, an unmistaken, totally clear path to liberation and enlightenment. So yeah, a more literal translation is the 3 rare sublime ones, which you see sometimes. But an easier translation is the 3 jewels. So, okay, so advice after one has taken refuge in relation to specifically to each of the 3 jewels. So there's advice about what to avoid and what to adopt. Right, this is a common way of pairing things in Buddhism, is Buddhist teachings, like behaviors to avoid or abandon and behaviors to adopt or take up and practice. So first, what to avoid in relation to the Buddha. So once we take refuge in the Buddha, then we avoid taking refuge in worldly gods. So for us, this probably isn't such a big deal, but Pabonker Rinpoche goes, he speaks a lot about it in Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand, because in Tibetan society and Indian also, well, like in India, there's so many different kinds of gods or deities that are like worshipped or related to, invoked. And also in Tibetan society was like a shamanistic kind of society before it adopted Buddhism. And so there was a practice of making offerings to, invoking, propitiating different spirits that inhabit, like, you know, a river or streams or mountain or different places or trees or whatever. So in the Buddhist cosmology, as we've discussed earlier, there's the idea that this, you know, in the world is not just inhabited by humans and animals. There are also all these other kinds of beings. There are hell beings, hungry ghosts, different kinds of spirits, and then like devas of the form realm, the formless realms, of, you know, different levels of devas. And so these other kinds of beings that we can't see with our eyes or easily communicate with, that they inhabit. Our environment is inhabited by, you know, kind of spirits, ghosts, other kinds of beings. And, you know, some people can more effectively perceive and communicate with them than others. And by some rituals and things, we can relate to them. Sometimes they harm us, but they can also very powerfully help us. So in Tibetan society, that's very much a thing, also in Indian society. And it's, so that's, yeah, so, but there's a big, the most important thing here is, I think, to see the difference between a person who has completely eliminated all faults. They have no more afflictive emotions, no anger, no selfishness, no pride, no malevolent intention whatsoever. And also no obscurations to knowing clearly, and no impurity in their motivation and their attention towards others. So a Buddha, you know, has perfected all positive qualities. So anyone who's a Buddha has abandoned all faults and perfected all positive qualities. So only we should exclusively rely on such a one as our guide, and not rely on, not take refuge, not completely entrust ourselves or turn for guidance to, in the same way, to any worldly being, whether it's a human or a spirit or whatever, because if such a person's mind has faults, now they have ignorance, there's things they don't know, they might have malevolent intention, they might have selfish intention, and they might just have ignorance such that they believe in a kind of wrong path and so misguide us, right? So that's the idea here, is that once we take refuge in the Buddha, we shouldn't take refuge in the worldly God or worldly being who's kind of still afflicted by ignorance and possibly misguided. And then the Dharma. So once we take refuge in the Dharma, because the essence of Dharma is not harming, so we should abandon harming sentient beings, right? Avoid harming sentient beings. And then once we take refuge in the Sangha, we should avoid keeping company with harmful friends. So it means harmful acquaintances, people who lead us into mistaken paths. So people who would encourage us to do things that are harmful to ourselves, harmful to others. So there's like a common saying among the Tibetans, like, harmful friends don't always have horns on their heads, right? So it can be, you know, as, you know, people who just encourage us to, you know, waste our time in trivialities, like, I don't know, watching endlessly movies on Netflix, or encourage us, you know, to I don't know, just see wealth, you know, accumulating wealth and power and influence, or taking refuge kind of in hedonistic pleasures, just turning to trivial worldly things as our final source of kind of satisfaction. Yeah, it can be kind of harmful to our practice. People encourage us to have strong wrong views, like bigoted views, or yeah, kind of superiority complex, or be selfish in different ways. Yeah. So we have to just have to check our own minds. How do other people influence us? Those who have a positive influence, we try to generate closer relationships with. Those who clearly have a negative influence, doesn't mean we abandon caring for them or spending any time with them, but we try to be more cautious, wary around them, kind of keep them at distance a bit. Then Okay, so then what to practice or adopt in relation to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha? So once we take refuge in the Buddha, then we should view viewing them as actual enlightened beings, treat images of the Buddha with respect, right? So statues, paintings, and so forth, images of the Buddha. We should try to remember that they're symbols of the actual Buddha, and the Buddha actually can manifest as such objects. So try to see all images of the Buddha as being the actual Buddha and treat them with a similar respect. So don't put them on the ground or criticize them, saying it's very ugly or very poor quality. So there's like with there, I mean, not that there is a different quality of statues or tanka paintings or so forth, but if we need to point out, for whatever reason, point out the inferior quality, it's the quality of the workmanship, not the quality of the image of the Buddha, right? The image of the Buddha is always we consider as being a perfect, but the workmanship with which it's made or represented might be some better and some worse. So try to view all images of the Buddha as being the actual Buddha, and then with that mind, make prayers, make offerings, so forth. Then the Dharma. So the main representation of the Dharma is Dharma texts. So treat even one letter of the printed scriptures with respect, right? So any book or even a device like your phone or another recording device that contains Buddhist scriptures, we should try to see that as a representation of an embodiment of the teachings of the Buddha, and then not put it on the ground or in a low place or in a dirty place, but keep it clean, keep it in a high place, and then when we use it, treat it with respect. But we can. Some people say you shouldn't like highlight or make notes in or underline in your Dharma text, but I think that's completely wrong. His Holiness definitely makes notes, and you're doing that for the purpose of helping you understand it better, right? That's not a disrespecting the text. But in the past, Tibetan Lamas always tell a story about there was one monk who, I think during the time of Atisha, he would stick little pieces of paper to the text as a bookmarks. And to stick the paper to the text, he would like scrape some plaque off his teeth and then put it on the text and then stick the paper on that. So we don't have that danger, but Atisha saw him doing that and said to him, like, what are you doing? You don't even practice refuge, that's so dirty. So anyway, we should, treat, but there's a big danger though, that we put text, like, especially in a Dharma center. It's important to have the Dharma centers provide little tables for each of the students. So that they have a place to put the text, but we should be mindful not to put, or when we're attending teachings someplace and we're all sitting on the floor, like don't put the text down on the floor, at least put a clean cloth, have a cloth cover for your text, or place them on top of a bag or something else so that they're not in a place where we, put our feet or where we sit on our cushions. Put them in a high place. And then the Sangha. So once we take refuge in the Sangha, then try to practice regarding even one ordained person as the actual Sangha. So the actual Sangha means Arya beings, those who've generated direct perception, direct realization of emptiness and the Four Noble Truths. Yeah. So here it's talking about the main representation of the Sangha here is ordained persons, monks and nuns. And we can even practice, generating this kind of recognition with regard to our lay Sangha people. Because we never know who other people are, if they're anyone around us. Do we know if they're a Buddha or not, if they're a Bodhisattva or not, what level of realization they have? Like, we don't know. So it's good to generate so as much as we can the recognition that other people and focus on other people's qualities in general. Okay, so that's the specific advice, what to abandon or avoid with relation to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and what to practice. So then there's general advice. Yeah, I think I can go through this. The general advice so there's two sets of general advice, actually. There's the oral tradition, and then from Arya Sangha's compendium of the determinations. It's one text, the compendium of determinations by Sangha. So the first, and this is, I'm including these because they're in the Refuge vow booklet by FPMT. That's part of the readings, and we'll go through, well, for this module, I think we'll go through later. So to heed the teachings. So one is to heed the teachings, and then sub four parts. Means to heed the teachings means rely upon a holy being. So once you've gone for refuge, rely upon a teacher, people who can teach the Dharma. And then listen to the teachings, not just once, twice, but again and again. Continue to learn more and more by listening to, reading teachings. And then what you learn, don't just listen and then forget about it, but try to comprehend and recall, what you've learned, what you've come to understand about the Buddhist teachings. Again and again, try to recall it, understand it, recall it, and make it part of your practice. So then the next practice accordingly, right? So try to adopt more and more of the Buddhist teachings. And then try to control one's sense faculties, right? So don't just blindly follow, craving for, I don't know, whatever, food, sex or drugs, alcohol, whatever, but try to modify one's, don't just blindly follow attachment, in short. Recognizing that, objects of attachment we can enjoy, but we should enjoy without the expectation that they bring ultimate satisfaction, right? And by learning that, through our own experience, and thereby, subdue, control one's sense faculties. Yeah, there's a bit more to say about that, but maybe skip it for now. Take up and protect the vows to the best of one's ability. So we'll talk more about this later, but it's the benefits of taking vows. But it's good to take vows because they're a powerful way to kind of practice pure morality, to make a commitment to refraining from different kinds of harmful behavior, and generate a lot of merit by keeping a promise that we've made to refrain ourselves or abstain from different sorts of harmful behavior. And then be compassionate towards all sentient beings. I don't think I need to explain just the importance of that. And then making offerings to the three jewels, the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, regularly as a way of remembering our respect for them, as a way of generating merit, and remembering the qualities of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. I think, okay, there's one other thing I just want to, I keep forgetting, it keeps coming to mind and then fleeting from my mind. It's forgetting, because I don't think we have time to go through the next set of advice, so I'll leave. But if there's any questions, I can take question. I'll try to remember. Okay, any questions? Yeah, please. Dana?
So make offering to the jewels. What does that look like? What is?
Yeah, so yeah, typically we have an altar. We make an altar and have representations of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, like in our room, in our house or apartment. So we have an image of like a Buddha, like a statue or an image, a card or painting, representing the Buddha, and then a little Dharma text on the altar, and then a stupa, usually representing the Sangha. Actually, those represent the Buddha's body, speech, and mind, right? The statue represents the Buddha's body. The text represents the Buddha's speech and the Dharma jewel. And then the stupa represents the Buddha's mind.
What's a stupa?
A stupa is like it's like a reliquary. Yeah, can you show one, Marianne? She's going to grab one. It's they arose in ancient India because when the Buddha passed away, he left the remains. There's a stupa. Marianne's holding up one type of stupa. So, but usually a stupa, it's a little, this kind of domed representation of the Buddha's mind. But typically, traditionally, a stupa, well, the first stupas were made because they would contain the relics of a Buddha. So after like Shakyamuni Buddha passed away, his body was cremated. And then the relics, the ashes and the bone from the cremation of his holy body And then there's other kinds of relics that, people who have attained a very high level of spiritual practice, they're these sort of like white and different colored pills that come from their body, especially the cremation of their body. So these different kinds of relics then were placed in stupas and then worshipped as a remembrance of the Buddha. So typically those are, considered a representation of the Buddha's mind, but then different parts of the stupa represent the body, speech, and mind. So yeah, it's usually an altar. That's the three minimum things in an altar should contain is a statue, a scripture, and a stupa. And then we make offerings every morning. Offer flowers or incense or water bowls, most typical food, and that's a way of creating merit by making offerings, and then making offerings and making prayers to these representations of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha.
Thank you.
So if you don't have a stupa, can you also use an image of a stupa?
Yes. Yeah.
Like the stupa in Kathmandu, the Buddha stupa.
Yeah, you can have an image of a stupa. It's fine. But an image of a text is not good enough. Just an image of a book is not good enough. Any Dharma book is fine to put on your altar. Yeah. You know what I wanted to mention, especially, we're out of time. Looks like we don't have any questions, but this is something I was thinking about this week while thinking about refuge, is that it's really important, because I think I emphasize quite a lot the traditional definition of refuge, where independence upon the two causes, sort of wholesome fear of potential future suffering, and then the ability of the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha to protect us from that, and then independence of that going for refuge. But there's a danger of emphasizing the whole fear aspect too much, and also there's a danger of thinking about going for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, Sangha in order to protect me from something in the future, and it becoming too abstract. Whereas I think, as a part of our understanding of refuge and our practice of refuge, it's really, really important, perhaps more important, to check if, and if so, how, like the Buddha and especially the Dharma, his teaching, does it protect us from suffering from moment to moment, like in our daily lives? So when we see, painful thoughts and feelings arise, like irritation, anger, self-doubt, worry, anxiety, jealousy. When we see different thoughts and feelings that disturb our mind arise, does the Buddha's teaching in those moments, can we use the Buddha's teachings, whether just to practice mindfulness of breathing, or, the antidotes to anger, seeing the faults of anger and then practicing loving kindness, or, remembering impermanence and death, or remembering to be kind, or all the different aspects of Buddha's teachings. Does it help us in those moments, in our day-to-day life, disturbing thoughts and attitudes, or we face difficult situations? Does the Buddha's teaching help us at those times, and thereby protect our mind from suffering in those moments, right? That's really the basis. It's like we can think about refuge like, protecting us from taking rebirth in the lower realm, protecting us from all the suffering of samsara. But all of that, like all of suffering of samsara, we have to break it down to small increments that comes down to like each moment. All of suffering of samsara is made up of moments of suffering in each individual moment. In each individual moment, does the Buddha's teachings help me or not, right? And if so, how? Right? So it's really important. And in one moment, when we can see ourselves experience suffering, and then see how some piece of the Buddha's teachings protects us from that suffering, helps to ameliorate that suffering. That's refuge. I mean, that's the smallest kind of building block of the mind of refuge. So we have to investigate to see if that's the case, for us, and how, and then based on that own kind of small instances of our own personal experience, then gradually we build up the bigger picture of how, in a more long-term scale, on a greater scale, the Buddha's teachings can protect us and others from suffering and lead us to happiness. So I wanted to make sure to mention that and try to encourage you to include that as part of your contemplation, through the week then of what, all things about refuge. So we'll stop there for today. So just to review, we spoke about a little bit, just these first two things. After one has taken refuge, then what to avoid in relation to the Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, and what to practice in relation to each, and then some general advice. So again, I'll send out these outlines. They're again, mainly based on Pabongkram Shist, Liberation of the Palm of Your Hand. Although these here, this advice from a Sangha is from the FPMT Refuge booklet, which is, I think, also part of the required readings. And if you haven't, I especially encourage you to read that article by Lama Yeshe in the packet. It's really nicely describes the essential points to know about refuge. Okay, so then next week we'll meet again. We'll go through the rest of this material for the module, and then spend some time meditating, discussing, and then reviewing before we'll probably do 2 sessions of like meditation kind of retreat after that. Okay, thank you all for being here again. Then let's dedicate whatever merit we've created. Rejoice, and we dedicate that in short, all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering, especially wars, especially war in Ukraine, and other places. We come to an end. May all beings be relieved of hunger, thirst, illness. And the global climate destruction, and we'll be able to reverse, find solutions to that, and pollution. So we pray for all human beings, all the animals, all the spirits, all the other kinds of beings that exist. May they all be well, have every form of well-being and happiness. And bring to mind especially any personal prayers you'd like to make. So may all your prayers be fulfilled. And then may the gurus have long and stable lives, especially His Holiness Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and others. And may the Buddha Dharma and all spiritual teaching an authentic path to well-being and happiness flourish. Especially may Ocean of Compassion Center continue to have all the causes and conditions to flourish and offer the Buddhist teachings and much benefit to beings long into the future. Okay. Thank you again. Enjoy your week and see you next time.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you,
Lisa.
Venerable Lista.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you, Mary Ellen and Urs.
Thanks,
Have a
Mary.
good week, everyone.
Bye, Venerable Palmo. Bye, Urs.
Leila.